Hello everyone and welcome to the Astroneer EXO FARM LTE explanation video. Now the EXO FARM event, or the Fuel Acquisition, Recovery and Maintenance event, is very similar to the Biofuel event that we saw last year, with a few notable differences that I will go into details about. However, that being said, the event revolves around generating sturdy squash, collecting their samples, producing one of 3 biofuels, and then sending those biofuels off on the EXO request platform for 500 bytes per cent. Now, as usual, I have already completed this event because I played it during stream. It took me maybe about 2 hours to complete. I did have a bunch of the infrastructure already available. I just kind of had to set up the factory line, but it didn't actually take super long to run, and it wasn't the most complex to complete. Upon doing so, you unlock a whole bunch of cosmetics. So covering those first, at 800 points, you unlock the Throwback Bundle, which contains all of the cosmetics that you could have earned during last year's Biofuel event, which includes the pumpkin visor I'm currently wearing, as well as the spooky palette that I have on. At 2400 events, you unlock the Giddy Up emote. At 5600 points, you get the Spooky Squash shelter, which is a really cool item. It's a normal shelter, it functions pretty much the same, but it's just a different appearance to it, and this can help you make some spooky bases, which is really cool, and I definitely hope we see a little bit more of the reskinned items in the future. And then the final one, at 8000 points, you unlock the Honest Living hat, which, if you don't know the meme, definitely look it up, but it is absolutely wonderful. It is a beautiful hat, and I really like it. Now, in order to create the biofuels you need to actually finish this event, you need to find one of the new 3 Cauldrangeas. Previously, there was only one type, but now we have the ability to choose between the leisurely, the brisk, and the swift Cauldrangia, each of which are found on their own individual planets, the leisurely on Silva, the brisk on Calidor, and the swift on Atrox. Now, the only difference between these 3 different Cauldrangias is how fast they produce biofuel, with the leisurely being the slowest, brisk being medium, and then swift being the fastest. Now, each of them all have the same recipes, so you don't need to worry about that. I just have them set to the different ones just to demonstrate what they are. The first recipe is for squashaline, which takes 2 sturdy squash samples. The next is the Adipetrol, which takes a sturdy squash sample and a spiny Attactus seed. Now, these are found on Calidor. There is a variant to these that appear on Atrox. However, those will not work. You need to make sure these are the ones from Calidor. Frankly, I didn't even really use them for the event because they're not the most efficient. The most efficient is Noxothane, which comes from the sturdy squash sample and a mutant elegant spew flower seed. Now, the mutant elegant spew flowers are found all across the surface of Atrox. When you do harvest them, they will give you a seed, and when you plant them to make them mutant ones, every single time you harvest them, they will generate 2 seeds apiece, so you don't need to worry about ever running out of them. It seems like there's always going to be a +1 gained from planting them. Now, the other thing that I do want to demonstrate with these is, as I said, the speed is different. So swapping these all to the Noxothane recipe, I will place them all immediately, and we can watch as the Swift Cauldrangia finishes up much faster, and you can even see it by the shrinking of the resources. So if you want to complete this event the fastest, I would highly recommend just going to Atrox, finding a bunch of Swift Cauldrangias, which are now marked on the compass, I might add, the closest one at least, and just get a whole ton of spewflower seeds. And when you produce them into Noxothane, if you store them in a medium gas canister, which I did to complete this event, 160 times 50 points gives you 8,000 exactly. So one full canister is perfect to complete this event in just one go, which is exactly what I did. Now, as I'm sure you can all guess, this event is going to require quite a lot of these sturdy squash samples because each and every one of the biofuel recipes requires 1, and the squashaline actually requires 2. So to get this sturdy squash, as you can see here, I have a cycle of sturdy squash being planted and then harvested by a proximity repeater. And this is done by adding an infinite loop with another delay repeater that is inside the radius. So proximity repeater will trigger the delay repeater. After the proper ticks, it'll re-trigger this, and it just goes on forever. And this allows me to constantly be growing sturdy squash as well as then replanting the seed as soon as the proximity repeater triggers. Now, These seeds you can find on each of the 3 planets with the Cauldrangeas, so that is Silva, Calidor, and Atrox. Silva, they appear in the mountains. Atrox, they appear in like the caverny, crag-ish type areas. I don't actually remember where they are on Calidor, but you can definitely find them there as well. These seeds, however, are best to be planted within a little pit of some kind. That way, when they do get harvested and they explode into all of the seeds and sturdy squash samples and sometimes some astronium, it is very easy for them to all fall in one location so they can be picked up and moved in a certain location with an auto arm. So to harvest the sturdy squash, I would highly recommend doing something very, very similar to this. The sturdy squash is much easier because the samples that you use for the recipe and the seeds to plant the squash are both different items, so you don't need to worry about possibly picking up them or managing them at all. That being said, for the sturdy squash, there are some variants that I do want to discuss. Here we have the curious sturdy squash, which, as you saw, I had a piece of astronium that was in my little pit right there. And that is because these are rare sturdy squashes that when you harvest them, they will provide a seed, an astronium, and sometimes a sturdy squash sample. I seem to get a sturdy squash sample maybe 50% of the time or so. The astronium is just beneficial because with the changes to the trade platform, you can now use this for exochips or hydrazine or other things like that. The other one are the plump sturdy squash. These are very, very fast growing, and when you harvest them, they will produce a seed as well as an explosion of sturdy squash samples. So you get a lot of samples from just a singular sturdy squash as opposed to just the one seed, one sample that you normally get when you have just a standard round or a knobby sturdy squash. They always do produce a 1-to-1. Sometimes, though, when you get one of these specialty pumpkins, you can get more resources than otherwise. That then leads over to how I have my spew flowers set up. My spew flowers are set up a little bit differently because remember how I said the sturdy squash samples and the seeds are different items? In this case, the item used for the recipe is the elegant spew flower seed. So you need to manage how many seeds you have growing versus how many seeds you can actually pick up and use for production. Because of that, I do have the delay repeater going a little bit faster. In my experimentation, this didn't seem to actually matter that much, as long as it was fast enough so that one cycle of an auto arm would not be able to pick up 2 seeds before you replanted, because you do want to make sure that you can get as many of these growing, just because your supply of seeds is very, very important. The other thing that I did is the proximity repeater covers roughly half of my resource pit. So rather than covering the entire pit and planting everything as soon as the seeds are available, I only cover half to give the auto arm some priority of picking up seeds that fall to the lower half while planting everything that stays in the upper half. Because sometimes I would start to run a little bit low and I would only have like one spew flower plant remaining, I do highly recommend having a backup set of plants, so every now and then you can kind of come over, harvest them, and replenish your supply over here just to make sure that you have a constant amount growing so you can supply a decent amount of seeds while also keeping a decent amount of plants growing. The actual production line for this event is not that complicated. Essentially, you just move your sturdy squash samples and your spew flower seeds to a storage mechanism. This can be anything you want. You don't even need the storage mechanism. I just like having it for overflow. You then take off the storage, place into Cauldrangeas to begin making your biofuel, and then you transfer your biofuel to an end canister. So I chose the gas canister once again because I can complete this event in one shuttle send for the minimum 500 bytes. One thing I do want to point out in my experience is that 2 swift Cauldrangeas outperform the production speed of a singular auto arm. So when I originally set this up, I had 3 Cauldrangeas here. However, the auto arm never actually was able to supply resources to the 3rd Cauldrangia because these 2 Cauldrangias were going through the resources fast enough that by the time this picked up the 3rd theoretical resource, one of these was already having an open slot, allowing it to be placed on here, and the 3rd one was basically just never used. So if you want to make an efficient production line, only 2 Cauldrangias are needed for one set of auto arms. However, if you do want the event to go faster, you can just create multiple different lines that can all produce things at the same time. The other thing that I do want to mention is that over here, this auto arm has a little bit of extra circuitry going on because as this auto arm goes to reach for seeds, there can be the possibility where as it picks up a seed, the proximity repeater can instantly plant the seed it is picking up. When that happens, the auto arm doesn't have the resource and the seed remains planted. However, the auto arm thinks it has the resource, and when it goes to place it on the medium storage, it can't because it doesn't actually have it, and then it bugs out and just stops moving indefinitely. To fix that, I have my delay repeater where every single time it completes a loop, it triggers my count repeater, which after 6 activations, it will turn the auto arm off, trigger this button, which will turn it back on. So it's effectively just toggling the auto arm, just turning it off and then turning it back on real fast to reset the operation and to allow it to grab new seeds once again. Over here, what I do have is another little extra fancy bit of circuitry that is not needed, but I like to reduce the clutter in my saves as much as possible, and that's exactly what this circuit does here. As you can see, the sturdy squash samples are not the hard to get resource. It is the spew flower seeds. And because of that, there can be a significant amount of sturdy squash that you have just hanging around. And if they just hang out and about, they do have the ability to pop and disappear, as I'm sure that you saw earlier on in the recordings right about here. And that just basically is a waste of a sample, and it's just to prevent your game from being overloaded by having hundreds, if not thousands, of the samples just sitting on the ground. To combat this, what I have done is I have placed a storage sensor on my storage system. And basically what this storage sensor does is it says, are we full? If we are, we're going to allow a secondary auto arm to take 2 sturdy squash samples and just turn it into squashaline, which is the least effective way to complete this event, but it's just extra points. I actually used these to get some bonus rewards after I had completed the event, just because I wanted to see what you'd get. When the storage is not full, however, then we allow this auto arm to operate by turning this one off until the storage is full. So as you can see, if I take 2 sturdy squash off of there, this auto arm turns off because we have a need for sturdy squash. When the storage is full, we now no longer have a need for sturdy squash for our primary production line, and then we open up our secondary production line. So this is just another good way to make sure you keep production going. Granted, you can probably figure out a more optimal way to have the proper amount of pumpkins to the proper amount of spew flower seeds to make your production line running at 100% efficiency, if you really want to. It's not really my style to do that. I kind of like just to build something simple and have some fun doing some stuff and let it run and go and do everything like that. And that's exactly how I did this event. So those are just a couple of tips and tricks that might help you complete the event a little bit faster, do it a little bit cleaner, just get a better idea of exactly what is required. But with that being said, that is everything that I do have for all of you guys today. So thank you so much for hanging out and taking a peek at this new event. I always like these events. They're always really, really fun to complete, and I hope that you guys do too. Don't forget to like the video if you found this informational or if you found this helpful in getting a better idea of what the event entails, specifically some of the new details that are different from the Boo event from last year. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you have a good rest of your day, evening, and or night, and we'll see you all very soon.